All right, welcome everybody to the second session for Friday of the 2025 IDRA online conference. I'm going to do very quick introductions. So this is the IDRA online conference for the Indigent Defense Research Association. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can go to indigentdefense.org. If you'd like to donate in support of running conferences and other things like that, you can go to indigentdefense.org/donate. Welcome everybody, and I will pass it right over to our presenters. Our first presenter, Preet.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hi all, we're really excited to have you here today. Happy Friday, by the way. I'm Harpreet Samra, go by Preet, and I just quickly wanted to run through what sort of our presentation is going to look like today. As you know, it's titled Social Work in Innovations in Holistic Indigent Defense. So what exactly is that, you're wondering? What might each of us be talking about and whatnot? So each of us on this panel today, there's going to be four of us, or there are four of us, respectively works in four different yet very collaborative sides of indigent defense, from family defense, mitigation work, managed assigned counsel offices to disability rights. So quite the gambit if you think about it. Each niche at the end of the day is to provide the best representation that we can to our clients. So really excited to be here today to be able to sort of talk about each of the areas of work that we're in, and sort of speak about how social work plays a role in that. So who are we? Each of us is actually going to go into a little longer intro as we delve into our actual presentations. But before we do that, we wanted to share our names and where each of us works. As I mentioned, I'm Preet Samra, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker who works as the head of social work for the San Mateo County Bar Association's private defender program in the Bay Area of California. So in the San Mateo County, which for those of you who may not know, is South San Francisco all the way to East Palo Alto, so the peninsula. So thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it to Caitlin.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much, Preet. And it's so good to be here. So we're so grateful for the opportunity to be with all of you today. My name is Caitlin Becker. I'm a social worker by training as well. And I am coming to you from the Bronx, New York, where I am the Director of Complex Advocacy at the Bronx Defenders in the family defense practice. And I'm also coming to you from Santa Cruz County, California, which is where I was until just about 6 weeks ago as the social worker and the director of holistic defense in a brand new public defender office out there. So I'm going to be talking with you about all of that. We'd love to hear, as to the extent that we can in this Zoom setting, from all of you. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to drop in the chat your name, your role, and the jurisdiction that you're checking in from. We'd love to, get a chance to respond to you and engage with you as much as we can over the next hour and a half. And we'll also invite you throughout the presentation. We're going to save some time at the end for questions and dialogue with all of you, but we would invite you to, as we're talking, if things come up, if you've got questions for us, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll keep an eye on them and make sure to elevate those questions at the end. So I'm going to pass it over to Kathy.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, my name is Kathy Ho. I am the Social Services Manager at Disability Rights California. So I am hailing to you from California. We have 6 offices throughout the state, and we are the federally designated protection advocacy agency for the entire state of California. So my organization serves the entire state, meaning every single county in California. And I will pass it off to Lindsay.
Hello all, I am Lindsay Bendell, and I'm going to go ahead and get the presentation started because my second slide is my introduction. So I'm going to share screen here. Okay. All right, can everyone see everything okay? Thumbs up? Cool. All right, so we're going to be talking about social work innovations in holistic defense today. My presentation is called Closing the Loop, and it's about the power of storytelling and non-capital mitigation. So a little bit about me. Lindsay Bendell, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I just finished my first year of my PhD at WashU. I began my career as one of the first adult social workers for the Colorado Public Defender's Office. And I'm currently completing my PhD in social work at WashU in St. Louis with research focused on non-capital mitigation. And I continue to consult on non-capital cases throughout the nation. So I'm still taking cases, a very small amount of cases, but I try to stay in the game because I think it's really important to be able to bridge research and practice. And some of the things that I've seen, you know, throughout these few days is kind of, I wonder sometimes if that's the missing piece, right? To be able to be a practitioner and doing the research, I feel like lends so much to the actual research on the ground. So I always try to have a toe dipped in the water so that I'm always kind of on the ground and I know what's new and what's going on and how we're all operating in the public defense world. So a little bit of history of non-capital mitigation. In 2003, the ABA establishes the guidelines for defense counsel in death penalty cases. Many of you are aware of these guidelines. These guidelines stated that as part of the criminal defense team, a mitigation specialist needs to be added. And what the mitigation specialist does is tell the client's life story. They have to do voluminous research, right, on all the records that they can find. They're supposed to go 3 generations back so they can learn not just about the clients, but the client's history and family history. And all of that is presented in trying to spare their life from the death penalty. Non-capital mitigation is born from capital mitigation. So after we've seen success in sparing lives from the death penalty, the Bronx defenders, you know, come out with this landmark study about holistic defense, okay? So holistic defense is a legal practice that addresses both the legal and social needs of clients through a comprehensive client-centered approach. So if any of you are going to be at ASC this year, this is a sneak peek of the poster presentation that I will be doing. This is a model that I am publishing. So this is the spoke and wheel model of a social worker's role in a holistic defense office. So non-capital mitigation represents one crucial spoke in the broader wheel of the social worker's role in holistic defense. It is an approach to individualized sentencing rooted in storytelling. So this magnifying glass kind of lost its way when I enlarged the screen, but it should be here. So the spoke that we're looking at here is the mitigation report, which is a report providing a holistic view of the defendant to inform sentencing decisions and promote understanding of the individual's circumstances. Now we're going to get to kind of the other spokes of this wheel throughout other presentations, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. If you would like a copy, I'm happy to send it to you. But this is kind of what goes into the role, the everyday role of the social worker that we see in a holistic defense office. And the mitigation report in a non-capital office is kind of what we're zooming in on today. A key difference is that in capital cases, the goal is to avoid a death sentence in favor of life imprisonment. While in non-capital cases, the focus is often on securing the defendant's return to the community. And that is a huge difference that I'd like to really hone in on. You know, what brought me here to pursuing my PhD and to wanting to actually do the research in this field was, you know, I always tell the story. My first homicide I ever worked, I was trained by a capital mitigation specialist who is an amazing capital mitigation specialist. She's kick-ass, okay? What she taught me to do is what she does on capital cases. And this was a young man with really severe untreated schizophrenia who, you know, snuck into a girl's window and brutally stabbed her to death. And so in my presentation, I wrote him up like a capital client. He's so broken. He's so mentally ill. He's so untreated. It's so scary. You know, take empathy on him. And unfortunately, how that ended is the judge said on the record during his sentencing that the only way to keep the community safe, these are exact words, I'll never forget them, is to warehouse him in prison for the rest of his life. And that moment is when I knew that something I did was not right if that's what the judge got out of that report. So I had to kind of go back to the drawing table on my own and figure out, how do I make sure that this never happens again? So the first thing we're going to talk about in the closing the loop process, and that's what I came up with. So we're going to go over that next. So the first part of closing the loop is we talk about the common mitigating themes. The first theme we all know about is mental health, which includes trauma, right? For the client I just talked about, it's schizophrenia. Intellectual and developmental disabilities. We know that's a big one in both capital and non-capital. Can they actually appreciate the gravity of their crime? And can they appreciate what the punishment is going to be and how to make those decisions about taking a plea deal, about what kind of sentence that they will be accepting if they do accept a plea deal? Those are things that are super important. Substance use disorder. We all know that substance use disorder is a common theme that we see in our clients in indigent defense. My partner is the grant administrator for all of the harm reduction resources in Missouri. I can tell you that addiction is a huge mitigating theme. And we often, not all the time, but we often don't see addiction and substance use disorder without that mental health and trauma component, right? If we see substance use, it should, at least in my mind, it automatically goes to, well, what brought them here? And that's what we're trying to dig up and find out, right? Education. What is their education? And this has what I call positive mitigation and negative mitigation. Positive mitigation could be, they have a college degree, right? This person can do really cool things. They can work a good job. That is positive mitigation that we want to be able to hand over and say, look, this person is reparable, right? They can go back into the community. And then we have, for lack of a better term, negative mitigation, right? This person never got a GED. You know, my second chance case dropped out of middle school and started selling crack at the age of 12. Still a mitigating theme, still telling the story, but we present it in a different light than we present what I call the positive mitigating evidence, right? Neighborhood and community. Again, indigent defense, a big one. Did they grow up where there's gang violence? Did they grow up in a neighborhood where a bunch of people were on corners slinging crack? What did that neighborhood look like and where did they come from? So these are the things that I kind of always have in the back of my mind when I'm first meeting a client. So closing the loop. So that's the first part, is we're looking for those mitigating themes. Now what we want to do, and what I've been trying to repair ever since that first homicide, is what can we do to alleviate public safety concerns? If we're going to talk about the fact that our client is addicted to heroin and they steal because they need to get their next fix, then what are we going to do so that they don't need to steal to get their next fix? And that is telling the story. That's how we're closing the loop. For every issue you present, we need to offer a solution. We need to emphasize the steps taken to ensure community safety. And that's something that we don't often do in capital mitigation, because we know the best outcome is life in prison, right? So we need to spend a lot of extra time making sure that we're closing this loop and offering solutions for these issues that we're presenting. Commonly used resources that we see as social workers and holistic, especially social workers and holistic defense offices, are things like mental health centers. A mental health center is exactly what it sounds like. It's like a big box of mental health services for people that are on Medicaid or uninsured. Detox center. We have this client that's on heroin and steals to get their next fix. We want to try to connect them with the detox center and see if they're amenable to detoxing to get a better outcome in this case. If we can do that, then we can present in this mitigation report that not only is the client amenable to services, they've actually been partaking in services, and therefore their level of dangerousness, right? We love to talk about the dangerousness, has decreased, right? Because we've already taken this big dangerousness risk factor out of the picture, right? We have halfway homes. These are great next steps for any of these things, including jail, including prison. Whenever I have anyone facing any time for something that's drug related, I recently finished up a federal case for drug trafficking. I knew that my client was looking probably at time in federal prison, but that did not stop me from advocating in a respectful way for a federal halfway house instead. And the way that I advocated respectfully was I put all the research in that report about how halfway houses serve people with addiction much better than prisons and what those outcomes look like. They still ended up getting 1 year in prison, but it was a lot better than the 16 years that they could have been getting. So my strategy is shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. You know, I don't do it in an outrageous way, but if I can make the connection between drug use and halfway home, even if they're looking at federal prison, I will do it. Because I know that that will probably get their sentence to the lowest end that the judge is willing to go with the information in front of them. So a lot of people don't know that states have, not every state, but many states have IDD specialty centers. So for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they're kind of like nursing homes, right? They're not the best place. They are much better than prison. When I was working in Colorado, anyone that picked up a charge that the DA was unwilling to drop with IDD, I immediately would get them into an IDD specialty center, because in Colorado, they would leave them in the medical unit. And, you know, I had one client that would just bang his head against the wall. They had to give him a helmet. So I had to get him out of there, right? The best place for him, because it's still secure, is an IDD specialty center, but he's getting what he needs. He's going to activities. He's not locked in a cell. And so these are a really important resource for our people with IDD. And every single time, at least in my jurisdiction, the DA agreed to it because we were keeping the community safe. We were keeping the client safe, and they knew it was the best disposition for everyone involved. Medicaid and SSDI. This is not usually our specialty when we're working in a holistic defense office, right? What we need to do is we need to know who those referrals are so we can get our clients connected to these resources as often as we can, because these can often be what make or break being able to go to treatment long-term or getting services long-term. So if we can make connections with those community resources, then we can get a steady stream of referrals going for our clients that are going to help them in the long term, and we're going to assuage those concerns for the DA, for the judge about, well, they don't have insurance, how are they going to go to detox? Well, we've already connected them with an Medicaid and SSDI care manager. Jail and prison-based treatment programs. If we know our client's going, or if we know we can't get them out on bond, then I always try to say, let's try to get them in a treatment program, because again, it shows amenability, which goes a long way. It shows we're already working on the community concern issue. And then we also have the records showing what they've been doing in treatment. And as a social worker and as a clinical social worker, I can usually connect those records to resources that would be available in the community and talk about how they can continue this trajectory in the community if given the chance. Closing the loop. So here's some kind of future research that I will be working on throughout my PhD. What I'm looking at is a person-centered approach to criminal defense through exploring the impact of non-capital mitigation. So the aim is to advance a person-centered approach to criminal defense by studying the effects of non-capital mitigation in serious felony crimes. I'll be linking up with the Missouri State Public Defender's Office because I'm in St. Louis. And I will be doing my research with them, probably some linear regression stuff. So, you know, all my stats people, if you are good at linear regression, please hit me up. So the next step after I get this, this model out is I'm working with my PI, my PhD advisor on a systematic review. Then where I want to go from there, if you guys were here yesterday, I talked a lot about qualitative exploration. In my view, it's hard to do hard quantitative research on a little known field without knowing what exactly are we looking at, right? So one of the things that I want to do is try to get a shared definition of what are we even studying and why are we studying it? From there, I'm hoping for my dissertation to do linear regression to do a quantitative analysis and put that together with a qualitative exploration for a mixed method evaluation on the effectiveness on non-capital mitigation in Missouri. Thank you all. Please feel free to stay in touch. My name, my email. I'm always happy to collaborate on projects. You know, I'm in publish or perish mode. So if you ever have anything you're working on or want to toss back and forth, or you want to talk about holistic defense and non-capital mitigation in your office, I'm available to talk. Now I'm going to pass this off to Preet, who is going to talk about how to bring independent contract forensic social workers to manage assigned counsel defense teams.
Thanks, Lindsay. I know that's a mouthful. I really appreciate it. We're really looking forward to all the research and whatnot that you're going to be doing. Thanks so much. So it's really great to see you all. Again, my name is Preet Samra, and I am the head of social work for the private defender program for the San Mateo County Bar Association, like I mentioned, in San Mateo County. I wanted to kind of just introduce myself to give you a little bit of background. I started my social work career actually in New Orleans, working for what acts as their juvenile public defender's office for many years. And I was working for a social worker there and sort of developed their client services unit. And then I transitioned and worked for the Santa Clara County Public Defender's Office in California in 2018, and then transitioned over to start and run the social work division here at the Private Defender Program. And with the San Mateo County Bar Association's Private Defender Program, or PDP as we call it, and I'll call just continue to call it PDP throughout the presentation. The PDP is a managed assigned counsel office. And for those of you who may not know too much about that, basically we're a fully panel-based office. The San Mateo County in and of itself doesn't have it actually never had a public defender's office. So I'm going to go a little bit into what that looked like, how we developed out the social work side of things, because it was very much a new entity to this county that had never seen social workers in this work before, even though many other Bay Area counties had already had social workers in their office. And so it was a large task to sort of take on, but it was really amazing to sort of do it. And I'll kind of go through how I was able to do that and what it sort of looks like today. And so just for you all to know, like I mentioned, we're, a managed assigned counsel office at the PDP. And a large portion of the clients that come through the PDP each have, an attorney and an investigator, and they never had a social worker. And now we've been able to sort of make it a holistic office, which is great. So my portion of the presentation is going to really work on and talk through how to bring independent contract social workers to your teams. So for offices who might not have social workers on staff, or you talk to, a lot of rural areas throughout the whole U.S. do not have public defender offices. So they're all often looking at bringing folks on from an advocacy standpoint, and often have no idea sort of how to do that, what that might look like and whatnot. So hopefully this can sort of help you do that today. So I want to talk through the objectives for today are going to be how does the private defender program work? What's the role of a forensic social worker in and of itself? So what can we do? Kind of a lot of what Lindsay just mentioned, but how it works sort of in a panel system. How was the forensic social work department built out for us at the private defender program, and the keys to success so far. So thanks. So Lindsay, next slide, please. Thank you. I appreciate that. Actually going to have my notes here as well. So the private defender program started in 1968. So with the passing of Gideon, as you all know, or hopefully you're learning this now, public defense became a thing in the United States. And with that, the San Mateo County in and of itself decided to have basically a private law firm take on all of the indigent defense cases. And so with that, when they started that way back in 1968, they decided to actually just keep it all the way through. And to this day, it's remained a panel type office. But at one point, many years in, I would say probably a good 20 years or so after 1968 is when the San Mateo County Bar Association took over, and the private defender program was created. And so as I mentioned, we're part of the Bar Association, but we are a program in and of itself. We handle every type of indigent defense case that comes through San Mateo County. San Mateo County is a county of about 800,000 people. And by every type of case, I mean everything from juvenile delinquency and dependency, adult misdemeanors, felonies, all the way through to all the collaborative courts, post-conviction cases, everything, right? And so we don't have any sort of conflict office that exists outside of our office. So we just handle everything. So cases kind of come in, it's really, how so arraignments, everything happens the same way it would happen anywhere else, right? Really the big difference is everybody just independently works on cases. And so our case management system can't be similar to a case management system that like public defense offices have, where all of the information gets stored into that one system. Everybody has to sort of work independently on their own. For us, we have a $25 million budget that the county gives us. So it is still county funded, but the Bar Association is the fiscal holder of the money. And so it's very, kind of unique for that. So Lindsay, next slide, please. Thank you. So what's just going in really quickly, what the role of a forensic social worker is. It's really to apply social work, like ethics, social work policies, social work theories, everything related to law and legal systems, but from a social work perspective, right? Which can be very different because attorneys are looking at it from a legal standpoint and the social workers are sort of looking at it from a mental health standpoint, thinking about the trauma, how this affected maybe decision-making and different things like that, and how we might be able to affect cases directly from that lens. And so what social workers or other mental health professionals, so actually my team not only consists of social workers with MSWs, ASWs, LCSWs, and whatnot. I also have AMFDs, licensed marriage and family therapists, as well as licensed professional counselors that are on my staff as well. So mental health professionals, like really looking at how do we inform cases to help an attorney try to get the best outcome possible for their client, right? And this could be on a variety of levels, and we'll go through that in a few. So we really bring a specialized knowledge of court systems in a different way to the table in and of itself. We are able to provide conclusions and recommendations, kind of a lot of what Lindsay was mentioning as well, that have to also be viewed an understanding from our perspective that it gets viewed from a very critical legal lens, and we're going to have a lot of rebuttal. So it's not just turning that in and being done with it and realizing like we might have a lot of opposition from, the DAs and judges and whatnot, and how are we going to respond to that from a mental health lens so that, we're the experts in our field and they are the experts in their field. So how are we taking our expert knowledge and skill set in order to sort of rebut and be able to have, a critical response to maybe the response that we get. And then on the other end, it's also to provide consultation, education, and training to other folks, right? Like judges, lawmakers, law enforcement, attorneys, anybody in the criminal justice system, because there are a lot of folks that kind of don't understand things from a mental health perspective. Even though I feel like we've been throwing this out there for decades, I still think it gets lost along the way. So next slide, please. Thank you. So forensic social work in action, right? What does that look like? What does that look like in our office? And so it can be broken down in many different ways. And I would say it's always a case-by-case sort of thing. You'd never know exactly necessarily where a case is going to go when an attorney first gives it to you. They may give you one task to work on for a case, and then it delves and opens up into like 6 different things. And so we have to be those folks who are really flexible to understand that like we might have been only asked to do that one thing, but here we go, we're on this case a lot longer than we ever thought we were going to be. I feel like that often happens on cases where we think, they're quote unquote going to be like, this is going to be an easier case. And then you have like 6 things that come up and you have to like figure out how to do it. So directly on cases, what we might do from in our office is like, and I feel like this is across the board as well, case staffings, assessments, so mental health cognition assessments, linkages to community resources, core advocacy, correctional health advocacy, case management services, community advocacy, court memos, documentation across the board. We could come into a case also at any posture of the case to be able to do these things, which can, can inform an attorney on so many different levels because of what they might have brought in on a case. So I can give you an example of a case just to start. So a good example of one is, so in California, we have a mental health diversion law, and the mental health diversion law, I think, is pretty heavily kind of the trend of the way that we're seeing our work go quite a bit here. This law passed in 2018, went into effect in January of 2019. And ultimately what the law does is for the majority of offenses, so that this is why it's such a heavy part of our work now, is for the majority of offenses other than homicides. There's like 3 offenses really that, like, you know, are the ones that it's not really, you can't really go for a mental health diversion for, but it's homicide that you can't, some like serious sex offenses. There's still some like sex bats and things like that you can actually do mental health diversion for, but like, you know, rape, kidnapping, that type of thing. But so for those cases you can't, but for the majority of cases, the attorneys could try for mental health diversion. And what mental health diversion looks like is if there is a diagnosed mental illness within 5 years, either diagnosed or currently being treated for, I should say, within 5 years of the offense in and of itself. And we can sort of do, from a mental health perspective, a sort of proven nexus that like someone's, you know, behaviors and what was going on with them could be directly linked to their, say, schizophrenia or their bipolar disorder, or, you know, pretty much almost every single diagnosis in the DSM-5 other than antisocial personality disorder and pedophilia. I think those are the only 2 right now that it's not, that you can't actually do it for, but pretty much for every diagnosis, if we can make a direct linkage and be able to show how it goes, it really is really, you know, we can actually do a treatment plan around that. We could potentially get mental health diversion for a client. So I quickly wanted to give an example of what that looks like to show you what a social worker or one of my other mental health professionals, what they might be doing on one of those cases. And so we had a client that you know, went into a Walgreens. This is all on video. So it was one of those things where it was like, we're not going to win this case, but how can we get this client a really good outcome? And so we had a client who went into a Walgreens and was, you know, trying on sunglasses. So when at one of those little like stands that like spin, trying on sunglasses, you know, kind of talking out loud to himself, and, you know, a little agitated, but, you know, just kind of doing his thing. And a security guard came up to him and started to talk to him, was telling him that he couldn't be there, he couldn't be doing this. Not sure necessarily exactly why, but this security guard in many ways was instigating him, had no idea that this person actually had was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I mean, how would the security guard know? But he also wasn't doing anything to sort of like respond in a way that was going to get this person, if he needed him to leave and whatnot, even though he wasn't doing anything, rather than actually doing it in a way that was helpful, he actually continued to instigate and be sort of aggressive towards our client. Our client, as he got more and more upset, he was becoming more and more aggressive himself. So at one point, it did become a physical altercation, but not in a major way, in a way where the guy had his sunglasses on, he pushed past the security guard and went outside of the Walgreens, right? And what ended up happening was he got charged with assault and also robbery because he was wearing the sunglasses as he like left, right? That was unintentional, but he happened to be wearing them. So all that to say, because he also had some priors, the judge at the time was trying to actually give him 5 years for this. And so the attorney came to me and said, Preet, can I talk to you about this case? And this is where the case staffing came in. And I was able to consult with the attorney, and immediately, like before the attorney even said anything, I was like, you have to try for mental health diversion. This is not a case where we shouldn't try that. It took us a year and a half. I was able to get a social worker to work on the case, and the social worker was able to, you know, really bring the nexus together of the client's schizophrenia, which he was diagnosed with, and had been treated before previously, however, had not actively been receiving treatment in about 6 months. So this is where we were able to actually bring in the nexus and say, like, this is where he was actively, you know, having, you know, in crisis, not medicated like he used to be and whatnot. And so she was able to really bring in the nexus in and of itself, write it as a report, create a really solid treatment plan that was showing that client was stable now, and this is what was happening to make him stable, so what treatment looked like and how treatment would continue. Because something like mental health diversion for a felony in California, it's 2 years of diversion. Misdemeanors, it's a year, but for this case, it was a felony, and so he was going to have to be on diversion for 2 years. And so we were able to get that actually done, and the social worker really had to work with the community to make sure all of the programs that client was in, from his psychiatric needs to also like housing, because he was also, I forgot to mention, he was unhoused. So there's all these different pieces that had to come in there, and we had to be able to present it. And the law actually requires a mental health professional actually be the one to sort of do that and make the nexus and all of that. And we were able to bring that to the table. 4 years ago, before I started in this office, so we didn't get social workers until August 2021, we were unable to actually get before that, nobody actually did anything, and this law was in effect for 2 years prior to that. So you can only imagine, like, in how cases were going, and attorneys had no idea that they even had or how to actually work cases around something like mental health diversion. So that's sort of what we did. And so the social worker was able to work through it, did all the case management services, made sure the client was connected to all the services, wrote the report for the court, and he was thankfully granted. And rather than doing time, he actually successfully completed his mental health diversion about a year and a half ago, which was fantastic. And he has not picked up any new charges since then, and we are hoping he's out in the community living his best life. So thanks, Lindsay. Next one. So how did we even get social workers to come and do this, like, in the office? So what was the strategy? So like I mentioned, I started only 4 years ago. So I started August of 2021 in this office. Prior to me starting there, we had 0 social workers that worked on cases, unless it was a really random one-off and the attorney was maybe bringing somebody on for a mitigation report or something like that, but it was very, very, very rare. So when I came on board, it was, trying to figure out, okay, what is this going to look like? Because I'm coming into a county where not only do they not have social workers, they don't really know what to do with a social worker or a mental health professional on their cases. They're so used to just going in, fighting their case from, the legal standpoint, and potentially bringing in experts like psychologists and psychiatrists and whatnot. But overall, other than that, they didn't even know that, like, oh wait, case management could be happening. I could be doing case staffings. I can have somebody write this other detailed type of, treatment plan, release plan, help me with the bail motion, help me do all of these different things on cases. And they didn't know how to do that. So when I first started in this office, really sat down and thought to myself, like, whoa, I am working with a blank slate here. And what is that going to look like? So first it was, what do I need? I need buy-in from the attorneys. I need them to understand that this could work on your cases, and it's not going to be so much extra work for you, because I know attorneys a lot of times don't want to do all this other stuff because they're so inundated with cases and whatnot. So, and so initially I was like, all right, how do I do this in a way that's really strategic and get them to kind of understand it and take that in, So I was on the ground working, going in, watching attorneys do their work in court, being able to talk to them, holding trainings, whatnot. And I did a lot of observations and whatnot to kind of see how are people working, so that I can understand what I'm working with, right? Because I think if I had just gone in there and said, here's the process, this is what we're going to do, all right, start making referrals to me, people would have kind of looked at me like, I don't even understand what you all do. And so I spent a few months actually doing that before really having a lot of social workers work on cases. And so it was a slow buildup in that, right? And so with the knowledge that I gained with that, because not only was I meeting with, or observing and doing that, I was meeting with community entities as well and saying, like, look, here we are. I just came into this office. This is what my role is and what I'm trying to do. And I want to also collaborate with you all. I want to be my social workers as I build out this team. I want them to collaborate with you and to see a lot more collaboration with attorneys. Make this holistic, and there's the whole reason why we're here. And so from that, and the knowledge I sort of gained through my meeting and observations, and my skill set from the work I'd done in New Orleans and for Santa Clara County, I created then a referral system after those observations. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide of what the referrals, sort of looked like. And then from there, I was able to, get them to understand what we could do for their cases. And then I was like, all right, well, I've explained what the work is going to look like. I did trainings for the office on what the work was going to look like. Now I need social workers to be actually doing the work. Thankfully, I started out, reaching out to colleagues that I'd already worked with in the community and said, hey, would you like to take on, independent work on this end as well with me? I would be the person sort of like overseeing all of this and be your point of contact and do any technical, consulting and those type of things with you. And I was able to thankfully build out a team. And so now, 4 years later, I have a social work panel of 37 mental health professionals, as well as what's soon to be 5 actually on July 14th, 5 Partners for Justice client advocates. And the client advocates are actually embedded in our office. And I think Caitlin might talk a little bit more on that, so I won't go deeper into that, but they're doing a lot of advocacy case management work on cases. And my social work mental health professionals are working directly from a mental health lens. So was able to really bring that on. And with that, as I built this out, I also knew like my social workers are going to need a lot of support. They're all independent contractors, but I don't want them to necessarily feel isolated, right? And so I did a lot of recruiting with them, technical assistance, coaching. I'm doing that constantly. My phone's always ringing. I'm always like talking to somebody about whether it's consulting on their cases, consulting on other issues that they might be having, whether it's like, the DA's, opposition response to one of their reports and how to respond to that, reading of reports, being able to give, feedback, just, if there's issues with attorneys, vice versa, attorneys having any issues with my team as well, just sort of always being that person that's like trying to assist and help in any way so that we can get the best outcomes at the end of the day for our clients. And so I also, have from there really looked at outcomes and data, because we've been really wanting to track the work and what that work looks like. And so from day one, I created a tracking system for myself that really has looked at what types of cases we're getting, what types of work we're working on. And like, is it mostly mitigation reports? Is it mental health diversions? Is it treatment plans? Is it bail motions, case management, that type of thing? And to be able to show, the county, this is what we're working on. This is what has looked like for ourselves. And this is where we continue to grow so that I can continue to grow the team here. And so that's sort of that. Can I get the next slide, please? So this was the initial request that so when I first started, also, I'll say I didn't have a case management system to work with. The Bar Association, the private defender program, was using defender data, but they hadn't created a social work space for it. And so for the first year, we were actually creating a new version of what we use defender data via JusticeWorks for ourselves. So we created a new version of that, and I was able to actually build out a referral system in that as well. But I first started with just having a paper version, and this is sort of what the paper version looks like. I still have this. If anybody ever needs it for their offices, I'm more than willing to send that out, and my contact information will be at the end. This was really helpful. It really was able, and a lot of this was also information gathering from my own experience before, as well as other offices that went for when they had their paper versions, and I was able to compile one that worked for our office. Attorneys had to fill this out in order to get a social worker or mental health professional working on any one of their cases. And then once we built it out in defender data, I now, everything's tracked through there as well. And attorneys, I don't have an advocate or a social worker work on a case at all unless they actually put it through the system. So then we can keep track of it as well. Next slide, please. So this is what the defender data system looks like. It's fairly basic for the most part, but what it does is the biggest areas, they're sort of at the bottom where it says services to be provided. And that's where they have to, and say the case specifics for what's going on. This is where they break down exactly what their needs are. I vet the cases. This directly always comes to me first. I vet the cases. If I have done this work on the ground for many, many years myself. So I'm able to look at this and understand the need and then where my questions are, because I know it's going to be the questions of my team. I will ask the questions, and then once I feel like, okay, this is ready to be assigned out, I reach out to my team and sort of, know who might need, who might either have asked for a case or, may be open to taking one, and sort of go from there. So that's from there. Can I get the next slide, please? And here is, as I mentioned, data. This was our data from last year. So as you can see, lots of mental health diversion that was worked on. We had last fiscal year, we had 540 requests come through in various forms. And this was sort of the buildup from it. And from last year to this year, we've actually also added we had only 2 client advocates. Now we have 4, and actually are getting a 5th one in July. And so these numbers should actually expand a lot more, and they should be a little bit more extensive actually on this next fiscal year, which I'll be putting together. So this is sort of what the data looks like. So data is really important in gathering so that you can show why you need social workers or mental health professionals or mitigation specialists or advocates on your teams to be able to work on cases. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, what were like sort of the keys to success for me? Like I mentioned, understanding the need, coming into the office, understanding, I knew what it takes to be a forensic social worker, right? And so because I had that background knowledge and skill set, I was able to bring that to the table and was immediately able to go to the attorneys and say, this is what we could be doing for you. I know this hasn't been done on your cases before. And to actually see the growth in this, I will tell you, over these last 4 years, I don't know how many attorneys say, I cannot believe this has really changed my practice. And that's what we wanted to see. And not only them, we have had judges ask specifically many, many times for an advocate to work on a case or for a social worker to be brought onto a case. And that tells me that's what success looks like, right? Like they knew that had been a missing piece and how that actually changed so much of what outcomes look like for our clients. And then we also needed buy-in from all of these people, right? And that's what buy-in looks like because of that. Not only from our staff, management, attorneys, all of that, but like everybody, even in the community, to understand that like not only did the face of the private defender program change in during this period of time, but we are actually really changing outcomes of people's lives and actually getting them set into the services and treatment that they need and had needed for a long time, but just weren't having like the folks to handhold them along the way and whatnot. Having a solid onboarding process, doing all the technical assistance, coaching for the panel, which I continue to do as well. And it's been a learned thing for myself, and I've grown really into this to understand what the needs of everyone looks like. I will tell you, I'm always available to everybody, and very luckily do get good responses of like, hey, you're so responsive. And I really love that because I always know that like you're always going to respond to me and I don't have to be sitting there waiting. And I want them to always feel like that because as all of my folks are independent contractors, I never want them to feel isolated in the work from anybody. And so they know that they're always going to get a response from me. Doing regular trainings, I try to offer those, whether I do them or what's available in the community, and try to get them out there as well. Maintaining good community connections, like I said, keeping connected with the jail, the staff there, the forensic mental health team, other entities in the community, BHRS, that we have the behavioral health, the county team, just always staying connected and making sure that they also know that they can reach out to me. So it's not just about my team. I want to be sort of I wanted to be a face of the social work department for the Bar Association. And I'm hoping that as I continue to do this work, it allows for that. And then at the end of the day, good data tracking to be able to, really show what it is that like what folks have brought to the table from a forensic standpoint to all cases. So I hope that's a little helpful. If you ever want, I have so many different documents, so many things, you're more than welcome to email me. Here's my email address. It's actually my full name, harpreet@smcba.org. I'm more than willing to just talk through things with you. I know it's really challenging to think about when, you are a rural community. I've talked to many rural communities. Somebody reached out to me recently from Nevada and was like, hey, I got your name from somewhere. I know you started this thing. We're just trying to figure out even to get one social worker here. How can we do this? And so I would love to talk through with you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. And now actually I'm going to pass it over. So Caitlin Becker is going to talk to us about, towards holistic defense. She's going to talk a little bit more about holistic defense and building and managing a culture of holistic collaboration as we do that. So Caitlin, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Preet. So as I mentioned at the outset, I'm a defense social worker by training, and I've been a defense social worker for the past 13 years, my entire social work career. And I'm really privileged to know nothing but defense social work. I have also only worked in public defender offices that are the institutional provider of indigent defense services. And so office settings different from what Preet just described. And I've also only worked in holistic holistic offices. So that's the bias that I bring to this conversation today. But like all of my colleagues on the call, Preet, Kathy, and Lindsay, we've all consulted and provided technical assistance, support, training to public defender offices all around the country who are coming from a more traditional model, or like Preet just mentioned, bringing on their very first social worker. And so I bring that lens as well, and I'm really happy to be here and to be a resource to all of you. As I mentioned, I'm coming to you from the Bronx. I started my career at Bronx Defenders as a family defense social worker, supervisor, and then managing director of the interdisciplinary social work practice here at BXD. After 11 years in the Bronx, I moved to Santa Cruz for almost 3 years to help start a brand new holistic county public defender office as their first director of holistic defense. I'm from Philadelphia and my family is all here on the East Coast. And so I came back to BXD a few weeks ago to return to my roots and be closer to my family. But while I talk about managing and building a culture of holistic collaboration, you'll hear me explaining experiences from both places, talking about both places as if I still work in both places. Both Santa Cruz and the Bronx are really near and dear to my heart. As you might imagine, Santa Cruz, California, which is a beachside county on the Central Coast in California, bears almost no resemblance to the community that I find myself in now and started my career in the Bronx. And so I'll reflect a little bit about what it's like to build a holistic practice in a brand new jurisdiction in a community that's really different from the Bronx where I started. So we can go to the next slide. On July 1st of 2022, Santa Cruz County opened its first county public defender office. Prior to that, the contract to represent people who couldn't afford representation in the criminal legal system in Santa Cruz was held by a private firm with a traditional model of representation. The firm had attorneys and a few investigators and administrative professionals zealously representing their clients as best they could in the courtroom. They had a really strong ethos as fighters in the courtroom, and they were really doing their best to provide support and advocacy to the people that they represented outside of the courtroom as well. But they had limited resources, high caseloads, and a client population that they recognized needed zealous representation, much more than just in the courtroom, out in the community as well, and support as the people that they represented were navigating the criminal legal system. So they were doing all of the things that you see here on this slide that so many public defenders around the country are doing as best they can in difficult circumstances in under-resourced settings. They are, investigating the facts. They are researching possible defenses, exploring ways to exclude evidence, presenting mitigation as best as they could on their own without, as you've heard already, the support of mitigation specialists or social workers or other members of the team that were able to really support in-depth mitigation. They're negotiating plea bargains and they're trying the cases, and they did a lot of trial advocacy in the courtroom. But the county decided that they were going to bring the public defender's office in-house and create a new county agency with more resources to support defenders doing this work in Santa Cruz County. And some of you may know Heather Rogers. She was named as the first county public defender in Santa Cruz. She worked at the firm and so had deep experience in the community that in Santa Cruz County. When she was interviewing with the Board of Supervisors, she pitched a model of holistic defense that would be responsive to the needs of her community of Santa Cruz County, the place where she was born and raised. Next slide, please, Lindsay. And holistic defense is not a replacement for the important work that public defenders in a more traditional model have always done and continue to do all around the country. Holistic defense adds to the representation and creates new possibilities for the people we represent. It envisions building holistic defense teams, as you can see here, rather than a lawyer alone to represent people inside and outside the courtroom. By asking deeper questions, as you've heard already from Preet and Lindsay, beyond the criminal case, it really allows defenders in all roles to identify the enmeshed penalties that come with criminal legal system involvement. And it also helps us to understand our clients and the community we represent in a deeper way, and provides more seamless access to the services and supports that Lindsay and Preet have already described. Next slide. And as many of you know, it seems to be working. So these are some statistics from the RAND study that Lindsay mentioned at the top. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this study. It was undertaken by the RAND Corporation and the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and compared outcomes for more than 500,000 cases handled by the Bronx defenders, compared with a more traditional defender over a period of 10 years. And you'll see the results on this slide here. What the study found is that holistic representation, working with social workers, advocates, investigators on interdisciplinary teams, reduced the chances of incarceration and other forms of mandatory custody by 16%, cut the expected sentence length by nearly a quarter, and the people that we represented in this holistic model experienced 1.1 million fewer days of incarceration, which saved taxpayers an estimate of $165 million on housing costs alone. If anybody hasn't seen this study, just feel free to reach out to me and I will be happy to pass it along. Next slide. In addition to the quantitative analysis provided by the RAND study, we heard really incredibly important qualitative data from our clients. And we have also heard from them that this model of representation is working. So at the Bronx, we survey our clients regularly and ask them about their experience of our representation at the conclusion of their case. And in our most recent survey, we found that of the clients surveyed, 88% said they felt connected to their legal team. 94% agreed that their legal team helped them to understand their case, and 91% agreed that their team fought for what they wanted. And if anyone's interested in how we went about developing this client survey, I would be happy to share our experiences with you. And it was really through a partnership with a local graduate program that was really interested in helping us to build out this survey that we were able to make that happen. When Heather Rogers back in Santa Cruz was pitching this model of representation for the county, she used the RAND study, and she used some of the resources that Bronx Defenders has and makes available to public defenders all across the country to advance her message and persuade the Board of Supervisors to invest in this model. And she started with these foundational principles that the Bronx Defenders also started with, what they call the pillars of holistic defense. These include developing advocates with an interdisciplinary skill set. So Preet talked about the importance of training lawyers and social workers and advocates together, making sure that training teams are lawyers and social workers and advocates training groups together, so that we're really modeling interdisciplinary collaboration in all of the kind of spaces that we can. We also want to make sure that our clients have seamless access to services that meet their legal and non-legal needs. And that doesn't mean that we're providing all of those supports and services in-house. Really quite the contrary. We're developing relationships with community providers, as Preet mentioned, and really making sure that our clients have that seamless connection to support that's often there and available, but very difficult to actually access and difficult to navigate. The third pillar is dynamic interdisciplinary communication among all members of the team, all defenders in every role, and then really foundationally, a robust understanding of and connection to the community that we serve. After Heather got the job as chief public defender, much to her surprise, she thought she was shaping the conversation, but she, and I'm so grateful, and I think many people in Santa Cruz County are very grateful that she got the job. And so a few colleagues came together to come up with, brainstorm, develop a mission, vision, and values that were going to guide this new office. And this was well before the office opened, when there was no furniture in that space, and they just kind of gathered on folding chairs and talked about what could this new thing be? What do we really know that our clients need? And how can we develop a mission, vision, and values that reflect what we as defenders value and what we've heard from our clients over many years of practice? And so the mission statement that they developed is to courageously defend the accused, to demand equal justice for all, to empower our clients with inspired advocacy in the courtroom and in the community, and that we are on a mission to elevate public defense one client at a time. The vision that they created is to lead the charge in transforming public defense, to empower those we serve by honoring their experiences, amplifying their voices, and offering real solutions to the root causes of system involvement. The values that they identified is that they wanted to build a defender office that was client-focused, collaborative, courageous, creative, culturally responsive, and compassionate. And Heather had and still has a really bold vision. So overnight, from June 30th to July 1st of 2022, almost everything about representation in Santa Cruz County changed. Many of the lawyers who worked at the firm came over to the new public defender's office. And so we were working to build this new public defender's office with a whole bunch of defenders who had experience, as Preet sort of talked about just in the last few minutes, from a more traditional model, kind of working on their own without the benefit of holistic support. And so the county office, the county agency, adopted a model of vertical rather than horizontal representation, ensuring continuity of counsel from arraignment all the way through the conclusion of the case. We created dedicated defense teams in every courtroom with social workers, attorneys, advocates, investigators, paralegals, and administrative professionals, all working together on these interdisciplinary teams. Social workers, attorneys, and advocates are in the courtroom every day, meeting new clients and representing existing clients in their pending matters. We created a holistic defense team, which started out with just 2 social workers and 6 client advocates through Partners for Justice, which I'll talk about in a moment, and I supervise that team. It has now expanded to a social worker who is the director of holistic defense, a social work supervisor, 5 staff social workers, and 4 client advocates. And I would be very happy to talk to anybody about how we were able to achieve that expansion. We started early representation, meeting with people in custody before their arraignment and consulting with people who are out of custody seeking advice before arraignment. We wanted to make sure that we were providing defense resources and defenders from the earliest possible moment, as close in time to the arrest as we could. And we've been able to do that. We moved from an entirely paper file system to electronic files overnight. This was maybe the biggest adjustment and the most challenging adjustment for our teams to make. But we've got attorneys, social workers, advocates, investigators, paralegals, and administrative professionals all having access to the same electronic file and electronic notes where they keep all of the work that the record of their advocacy on cases. And then lastly, and again, really critically, we started to engage the community by offering Know Your Rights trainings, tabling at community events to advertise early representation in our post-conviction relief projects, and building a presence in the community. We joke, but it's really true. We accepted every invitation to speak everywhere, to go to any community event, to table, and we created an expectation and invitation for defenders in all roles in the office to participate in that endeavor. And that has been building over time and continues to build. Next slide. We are here to talk about data and research, and we have found and agree with all of you that data really, really matters. And so we collected data to help tell the story of success of our holistic defense approach. So what happened in Santa Cruz was the county agreed to fund 3 client advocates on a 2-year contract with Partners for Justice, which is an organization that helps place client advocates on a 2-year fellowship at a public defender office that might not otherwise have the resources to build out a holistic model. And so this is just a little snapshot of some of the data from our first 2 years of work with the 6 advocates that we had in total in Santa Cruz. 3 were funded by the county and 3 were grant funded. Our advocates as a team completed more than 3,300 holistic intakes, which asks questions beyond the legal case and helps identify some of those enmeshed penalties of criminal legal system involvement and issue spots for places where we might be able to offer some support. They provided advocacy and referrals related to mental health and substance use disorders for more than 400 clients. And then, as you can see, they provided housing advocacy, benefits advocacy, referrals to courses, mitigation that might help to advance our clients' goals, especially as it relates to plea negotiations. The holistic advocacy other category was really wide-ranging, from medical advocacy for clients in custody to supporting parents who are facing CPS investigations in a dependency court, and connecting with family members, coordinating property retrieval, things like that. Next slide. And so we were able to use this outcome data to create reports to our board of supervisors about the impact of the work that our advocates were doing. So on the left-hand side, you'll see our early defense, early representation advocacy. So we were able to provide representation early to 675 clients in custody. And that means that all of those clients had a visit from a public defender, from an advocate, and connections to an attorney if they were interested in advice before arraignment, well before we were entering the courtroom. And we met with almost 56% of those clients who were incarcerated and potentially eligible for early representation. But as I said, we also expanded that to out of custody early representation as well. And what we found was that 41% of the people who had access to this early support and information gathering that helps to support release advocacy and bail pitches, as Preet mentioned, 41% of those clients who had access to early representation were released at arraignment or before arraignment. And then the second slide shows just some goals achieved by clients with closed cases. So the vast majority, of course, of the work that we're doing is to help our clients resolve their criminal cases. And so criminal case related goals is the biggest chunk of the pie, followed after that by health related goals like mental health, medical, and substance use treatment. And then the others are there as well. We're happy to share the slides. Next slide. I borrowed Preet's keys to success. So you can just go ahead and click through, Lindsay. So what we learned, that change takes time and patience, that everything is a pilot. We never promised that we were going to do anything forever. We said, let's try this and let's try it out. And we invited feedback all along the way so that people were really a part of that process. We found that we started out collecting way too much data. And so we tried to figure out how to pick key data points and explain the why behind the data and show our work. When we asked people to be entering data into our system, we wanted to kind of create reports then that were going to show them why this data really mattered. We found, and I think it really remains true, that our leadership team was a critical part of this sort of effort. Culture change takes time and would never have happened without a real input and buy-in from all of the leadership in our organization. You can keep clicking through, Lindsay. And so attitude reflects leadership is my favorite line from Remember the Titans, one of my favorite inspirational sports movies. And we found that, if we got the buy-in of the leadership team and we, that helped really to promote the buy-in from the rest of the organization as well. We recognize that conflict is inevitable, that we need to navigate it with intention, that holistic defense is hard, and we're coming from different lenses. And so we need to do really intentional work to make sure that we're on the same page. We also recognize that early social work engagement yields results. You can't do everything, but you can do something. And so start somewhere. None of our, like my office and Preet's office and Bronx Defenders did not develop overnight. And we really kind of just keep putting one foot in front of the other. The last resource I want to offer is the Holistic Defense Social Work Toolkit, which was developed by the Bronx Defenders defenders and through a particular partnership. This is the next slide, Lindsay, with the Center for Holistic Defense. And so the Center for Holistic Defense is housed within Bronx Defenders and provides technical assistance and support to public defender offices or jurisdictions or individuals who are really interested in this holistic defense thing. And so we developed this toolkit with input from public defense social workers, defenders all over the country, Preet included, to get their take and find out what works. And we tried to collect as much as we could in one place. And so this is available as well, and I'd be happy to share it. That's it for me. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Kathy, who is going to talk about holistic indigent defense in criminal and civil legal systems, creating a pipeline of social work opportunities beyond private practice therapy. So with that, I'll pass it over to Kathy, and I'll invite you to start dropping your questions in the chat, because after Kathy's done, we'll open it up for questions and dialogue.
Thanks, Caitlin. And I'll try to get through my slides quickly because I know we're running short on time here. So my name is Kathy Ho. I'm the Social Services Manager at Disability Rights California. And I had a very circuitous route to this kind of work. So at times I feel like an imposter because my work is, my background is very clinical. I did community mental health when I first graduated with my MSW, working primarily with immigrant and refugee populations. I did school-based mental health services. I did mobile crisis, wraparound youth services, inpatient psychiatry, and pediatric medical social work. So I've kind of dabbled in a bit of everything. So I feel like that background's really helped me have a way of navigating the various systems that our clients tend to get enmeshed in as we meet them in the court system and the various legal systems. So again, very circuitous route. I also have my PhD in social work, and before getting my PhD, I was working at the inpatient psychiatric unit in a hospital. And one of the most impactful experiences I had was this experience I had with my patient, who I'll call Mai. And she was a monolingual Vietnamese woman who came to the US on a visitor's visa from Australia. She had a history of bipolar disorder. She had an argument with her husband, who lived in Monterey. She ended up leaving with her 4-year-old son and heading over to the airport to go home, basically, to Australia, because she was pissed and probably off her medications and experiencing some kind of manic episode. Well, she was picked up by the police. She was brought to my unit. I was able to talk to her psychiatrist in Australia and figure out, and I consulted with a psychiatrist in the Bay Area who at the time was the head of the Asian focus unit at SF General, and was able to get her on a medication regimen to try to stabilize her so that we could get her back to her family because she had been separated from her 4-year-old as well. Well, during her hospitalization, she was falsely accused of sexual assault by another female patient who was white. And without any investigation, the hospital risk management decided to just hand her over to the police when they came knocking to arrest her. And very in a naive way, not knowing anything about the criminal legal system, I thought, well, I guess they're going to do their job and they'll realize that all this is false and they'll release her. And, we kind of all, we're concerned and really distraught by the whole experience of having a client taken off our unit and arrested. But at the same time, we were hopeful that the legal system would do its job. Well, it failed. I found out 2 years later, as I was leaving the hospital to pursue my PhD in New York, that she was still languishing in jail for about 2 years, allowed to decompensate, and nothing had been done for her. We were in San Mateo County, so it was the PDP before Preet was there with the social workers. And because of that, I reached out to the Asian Law Caucus, who then put me in touch with Myra Weir, who was the head of the PDP at the time. And I actually knew Myra because she used to do the involuntary hospitalization hearings for us. And so I knew her from that relationship as well. Well, she immediately reassigned her case to a different attorney, private defender attorney from the panel. And he immediately investigated and was able to get her into a hearing as soon as he could. But she ended up taking a plea and pled guilty to kidnapping, which to me was horrendous because that meant that she also had to register as a sex offender and she would have this label, even though she absolutely did nothing wrong and was falsely accused. And then after she was released, and from there she was released for time served because she'd been languishing in jail for 2 years and was immediately picked up by ICE. because she had overstayed her visitor's visa. So this was a horrifying experience that has obviously stayed with me and has really impacted my development as a social worker and how I envision my role as an advocate and what to do, when people who are the most vulnerable are immersed and thrown into these systems that don't actually necessarily achieve justice without the proper advocacy. Next slide. So the problem we're trying to solve with this presentation. So my presentation is really focused on leveraging social work internships to help train the next generation of social workers to do this kind of work, to be mitigation specialists, to be forensic social workers, to work in the public defender's offices, legal aid offices, various offices that you'll find social workers nowadays, which is becoming more and more commonplace. So the problem is that many social work programs will tend to have a clinical focus, and their common concentrations are child welfare, school social work, medical social work, mental health, families and children. Very few programs even introduce or are aware of social work roles in legal settings, other than the family court setting, as it relates to child welfare. So before I stumbled upon this work, I didn't even know that social workers worked in legal settings, right? So I really feel like it's a great disservice to MSW students who have an interest in social justice work and may not be particularly interested in becoming private practice therapists, right? Because it's like the stereotype is that, or the assumption is that once everyone gets their license, they'll make their way to private practice therapy where they have the 50-minute hour and it's a bit more manageable finance-wise, right, than working in nonprofits in the community settings, which is where we really have to hone our skills. So really, I think models of holistic indigent defense in legal settings are training opportunities for social work graduate students to learn more about the potential career pathways as forensic social workers and mitigation specialists, rather than limiting their professional outlook to private practice therapy. And so these internship opportunities can really serve as an integral role in creating a pipeline of trained social workers to effectively collaborate in legal settings. So if we can help you make the case for adding at least one social worker to the staff, again, just even one, that'll help encourage holistic representation and the addition of social work interns, to your staff and to your team. I think we would have a win here. Next slide. Okay. So social work internships, there are certain requirements for social work internships. You can't just say, I want a social work intern and you get one. There's a contract that happens. So you want to consider, what are the learning opportunities available at your agency? What are the roles and scope of practice for the social work interns? What kind of learning opportunities do you have available? And what capacity do you have to supervise the intern? Because there is an expectation that you will provide the proper supervision to the intern in order for them to benefit from these learning opportunities and to learn the skills and knowledge that's required for them to even graduate from the program. So first of all, it requires you setting up a contract. Basically, you need to set up either what they call an affiliation agreement or an MOU with the School of Social Work, with the MSW programs. That's typically pretty boilerplate. They'll send you a boilerplate contract. You can review it. If you want to make any adjustments, there's this back and forth of some redlining, but it's pretty standard. And one of the most important things is insurance, liability insurance. So you have to have professional liability insurance that'll cover your social work interns as part of that. Also, as you think about the social work internship and the opportunities, that'll help you figure out, are you open to first-year interns versus second-year interns, or both, right? First-year interns typically intern for 2 days a week, up to 16 hours. Excuse me, mouth is getting dry. Up to 16 hours a week. And second-year interns can intern for up to 24 hours. And so that's about 3 days a week, right? So that's a significant difference in hours. And also the skill of the social work intern is typically dependent upon whether they're first year or second year, right? So a second-year student has a first-year internship under their belt. So they're coming in with a bit more skill. And so as you're thinking about the role of a social work intern at your agency, are you looking at someone to do more kind of case management and some light client contact, and client support, right? That might be appropriate for a first-year intern, whereas someone that is going to do a bit more clinical work, writing up mitigation reports, doing a bit more of the heavier client contact and support, being able to provide more of the mitigation specialist type role and getting trained in that, you'd want to consider second-year students, because that's, with a 24-hour per week commitment, that really allows more time for them to work on cases and for them to get the proper supervision and support and exposure to the legal setting. Also, you would want to consider who do you have available to supervise a student, right? So do you have a social worker on staff, right? One of the key things is they do need to, social work interns do need to be supervised by a social worker. Their instances will also make exceptions for a licensed marriage family therapist or licensed clinical counselor if they have if they have that licensure. They can also supervise social work interns. But whether or not you're able to have a social work supervisor in-house versus trying to maybe hire someone as a consultant to provide supervision to your interns, or possibly working with the MSW program to see if they may have faculty or staff in their programs that may be able to help with the supervision of interns if you don't have a supervisor in-house that would be able to do that. Now, if you were to have that set up, typically they would require a task supervisor on site. So that could be anyone and doesn't require a mental health or clinical degree. So it could be a lawyer or other staff person that does the day-to-day task supervision if the clinical supervisor is not on site to supervise the intern. And the supervision commitment is a minimum of 1 hour weekly of individual supervision. So that means that students are supervised very closely, right? So they're expected to meet with their supervisors to discuss ongoing cases, clinical issues that are coming up, and to talk through all those things on a weekly basis to make sure they have the proper support. And so thinking about whether there's the capacity in your agency to provide a supervisor that can actually do that. Recommended, I mean, definitely if you're able to provide a stipend, even a small one, that's really helpful in attracting interns to your agency, and will give you a larger pool to draw from. Also, if you're able to contract with various programs across various programs in your jurisdiction, then you can have multiple MSW programs referring students to you for possible placement, right? So you want to think about drawing from a larger pool so that you can choose the most skilled students to work with you and to continue to build those skills. You'd want to think about also, and work study is an option too. So I think definitely putting that out there. Getting involved in federal work study program through the university that's associated, that the MSW program is a part of. If you establish yourself as a work study site, then the work study funds will kick in half of the amount, right? So they'll cover 50% of the support to the student, right? Which is typically an hourly rate for their work. And so that's something to consider as far as like trying to get the most bang for your buck. If you have a small stipend to offer, maybe you'd want to, also pair that up with work study to get more funds to the students, because oftentimes students are attending school full-time, not necessarily able to work, and having to provide free labor during a practicum or internship is a pretty heavy financial burden for students. So that's something to consider. And I think also recommending any additional internal or external trainings that you can provide to interns to make sure that they are prepared to do the job, right? And they're supported to do the job. So external trainings could be trainings from NLADA, NAPD, from ARC, ARC. In our jurisdiction, we have Seneca that provides free trainings that are available to anyone who serves youth in the Bay Area, right? And so they have all kinds of trainings on supervision and clinical issues and crisis counseling and things like that. If your agency subscribes to like PLI or one of those types of services, they often have trainings that could be relevant. There's a zero suicide training that's available that I have every single student of mine go through, because it's free, but it's also a great training on mental health and crisis counseling, as well as risk assessment. As far as internal training, just thinking about your onboarding process. What does the onboarding look like? Are you able to provide opportunities for mock client interviews, right? Where students are able to kind of practice those skills, get feedback about it, and really hone those skills in order to have better and more successful client interactions. So those are things to consider as you're thinking out in SW internships and practicums. Next slide. So as you can see, this is Lindsay's model, so I'm not going to belabor it. She's talked about it. And we've talked about, social work skills that are necessary. I really feel that these social work internship programs should be really focusing on the foundational skills that all social workers need to thrive and be successful in any setting, right? And so I feel like what I have listed here are kind of the foundational skills for all social workers to have. But of course, in legal settings, there are additional skills on top of that that are needed, right? Specific to the legal system, specific to investigating and navigating and understanding theory of the case and contributing to developing theory of the case, right? So I think those are things to think about as you think about the training of social workers and social work interns in your setting, how you're going to incorporate that, and just to, excuse me again, just to harken back to Sharice's presentation earlier today on emotional intelligence, on EQ, right? I think the social work training that we get and the way social workers are trained really focuses and zeroes in on the enhancement of someone's emotional intelligence, right? So one of the trainings that I have my students engage in as interns is I have them do weekly reflections. So they have a weekly reflection journal that they have to send to me every week, where they're reflecting on an interaction that they had, and what happened and what would they do differently and what was going on for them. And, how did race or poverty or any other the isms impact that, right? Because emotional intelligence, as Sharice has talked about, is about self-awareness, about empathy, about self-regulation, about social skills, right? So as supervising social workers, we're really working with interns to really enhance those skills, right? Enhance those skills of self-awareness, of self-reflection, of self-regulation, right? In the moment, even though they may be frustrated with a client, what exactly do they do? How do they handle the situation? How might they handle the situation better next time, right? And being able to reflect on that. I often have, in all the settings that I've been in where I've had social work interns, we have mock client interviews where they actually get to have a role play or several role plays in which they demonstrate their skills and work through a situation with a client, and then get real-time feedback afterwards from us supervisors, letting them and being able to talk about what their strengths were, but where the challenges were and how to correct that for next time and to really enhance those clinical skills and those interaction skills. Next slide. And I see that we are running really short on time. So at Fordham, just really quickly, Fordham's model, I was a part-time supervisor. I supervised students anywhere between 2 to 5 students across these different clinics in different types of law. So with that, I was a part-time supervisor, right? And so and that involved reviewing documents, doing basically covering every aspect of their training. And so there's a part-time model, which is definitely possible. Next slide. At Stanford, it was a full-time model, right? So I was hired as a full-time supervisor there during the pilot project. And so as a full-time supervisor, I was building out the program and developing it, but also supervising students across these 4 different practice areas. So that's something to consider as far as can you hire a part-time supervisor? Can you hire a full-time supervisor? What do you have the funds for? And what is the need of your agency as far as that level of supervision? Next slide. This is just some data that obviously I can't get into, but it just shows how much of the work the interns did at Stanford and their touch points and the various tasks that they engaged in that really helped them develop professionally. Next slide. So at DRC, we're a phone-based system. Like I said, we cover the entire state. And so here in this model, because we cover the entire state, we are not doing a deep dive with a few handful of clients the way we did at Fordham, the way I supervise interns at Fordham at Stanford. Here we actually have many, it's high volume, phone-based, and very short term. Next slide. This was just the process that DRC that we have as far as intake process and the early integration of social workers and social work interns to make sure that there is successful and close collaboration in the work that we do. Next slide. And so this is the social work data from DRC from July 2022 to December 2024. So as you can see, we had 1,535 cases that were assigned social workers. With social workers assigned, and we had various levels of service. So we did quite a bit in terms of volume, given that we only had a senior social worker, 2 social workers, and anywhere between 2 to 5 social work interns. Next slide. Okay, and so benefits. So I think I don't need to belabor this, but I'm gonna open up to questions because I know we're like 1 minute left. So I apologize for that. So why don't we go ahead and move on to questions?
It's okay, Kathy. We're going to share our slides and our
That's
colleagues are
right.
going to send them out. And we've shared our email address and phone number many times. So in the chat, please really just feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to talk with anybody.
There's so
Yes.
many topics I think we just went through, and I know there's probably all kinds of different questions depending on where you're coming from. So I think it's fair.
Yes, absolutely. We'll share our slides. My contact information is on there as well. I'm happy to talk to anyone about launching a social work internship program and what that's like as far as, possibly bringing on a social worker or social work supervisor to do that. So thank you all for your interest in attending.
And it's Friday afternoon at 3:30.
Yeah.
So kick it back to our colleagues.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was a great set of presentations. I see a lot of new people in the chat as well. We've been really happy with the increasing presence of social workers and holistic defense people in IDRA. So any and all of you, please do go to indigentdefenseresearch.org and sign up for the listserv there if you have any interest at all. We're already a diverse community, but I think we're becoming more and more diverse, and this is a big part of that. So I really appreciate the presentation, and I encourage you all to stick around. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Take
you.
good care, everybody.
Great weekend. Bye, everyone.